What dark truths hid behind Hollywood's golden age glamour? Beneath the perfect stars and classic films were secrets studios worked hard to bury. Images were manufactured, flaws were erased, and scandals were silenced to protect the illusion. Get ready for real Hollywood stories. So bizarre, so unsettling, they prove the truth behind the scenes was often stranger than anything ever written into a script. Clark Gable's $60,000 smile. Clark Gable didn't just play the king of Hollywood, he was marketed as one. His confident swagger, effortless charm, and legendary smile made him the ultimate leading man. Audiences saw perfection every time he appeared on screen. But behind that iconic grin was a secret the studios worked overtime to hide. By his early 30s, Gable had lost most of his teeth due to severe gum infections and poorly fitted dental work. For MGM, this wasn't just a medical issue, it was a branding emergency. Reports claim the studio commissioned custom dentures designed specifically for close-ups, costing what would be roughly $60,000 today. They weren't meant for comfort, they were meant for illusion. Off-camera, the reality was far less glamorous. Co-stars allegedly complained about his breath, made worse by heavy smoking and the prosthetics themselves. But no one dared say a word publicly. Studio contracts, image control, and unspoken rules kept everyone silent. The smile that sold millions of movie tickets came with daily pain, discomfort, and constant maintenance. Gable's case wasn't an exception. It was the blueprint. Hollywood didn't just polish stars, it rebuilt them, flaw by flaw, no matter the cost. And if a man at the top of the industry had to hide something this basic, it raises a darker question about what happened to stars who had far less power. The teen star, surviving on pills and pressure. Judy Garland was still a teenager when Hollywood decided her body needed fixing. While audiences saw a bright-eyed girl with a powerful voice, studio executives reportedly saw a problem they needed to control. She was told she wasn't thin enough, wasn't polished enough, and wouldn't stay employed unless she changed. To keep her camera ready, MGM allegedly placed Garland on an extreme regimen. Reports suggest her daily intake was limited to light broths, black coffee, and appetite-suppressing pills. To push her through long shooting days, stimulants were added. At night, different pills were used to force sleep. The cycle became routine, not medical care, but production management. She wasn't trusted to manage herself. Studio staff were said to monitor what she ate and when she rested. If her weight shifted, consequences followed. During filming, she was placed in a tight corset meant to reshape her figure, reinforcing the idea that her natural body was unacceptable. Over time, that pressure went beyond the physical. Being told she was never quite enough created a constant fear of losing roles and approval. Many believe this environment laid the groundwork for her later dependence on substances, long after the studio system had moved on. On screen, Garland radiated warmth and innocence. Off-screen, she was exhausted, chemically pushed, and emotionally worn down. Her story wasn't about a lack of talent or discipline. It was about a system that prioritized image over humanity. And once that kind of control took hold, it rarely let go. A Hollywood legend's final joke after death. John Barrymore lived like every moment was a performance, and according to Hollywood lore, that didn't stop when he died. When the legendary actor passed away in 1942, stories began circulating that his friends gave him one last, deeply unsettling send-off. Reports claim a group of close Hollywood insiders decided to turn his death into a prank only old Hollywood could produce. The story goes that Barrymore's body was temporarily removed from the funeral home and positioned upright in a chair, waiting for actor Errol Flynn to stumble in after a night of drinking. When Flynn allegedly saw the lifeless figure staring back at him, he panicked and ran, convinced something impossible had just happened. While details vary and parts remain disputed, Flynn later acknowledged a version of the event in his own writings. As bizarre as it sounds, Those who knew Barrymore insisted he would have loved it. Known for excess, heavy drinking, and a warped sense of humor, he had spent years blurring the line between brilliance and self-destruction. Even in death, the legend refused to behave normally. But this kind of twisted humor also exposed something darker about Hollywood. A world where fame dulled boundaries, and even death could become part of the show. The starlet whose death raised too many questions. Thelma Todd had everything Hollywood promised: beauty, fame, and a rising career. Then, at just 29 years old, she was found dead in her car inside a locked garage. The official explanation came quickly, but almost nothing about the scene seemed to add up. Todd was discovered wearing an evening gown, a mink coat, and expensive jewelry, as if she'd been ready for a night out, not preparing for the end. Blood was reportedly found on her face, her car keys were still in the ignition, and the garage door was locked from the inside. Authorities ruled the death accidental, suggesting carbon monoxide poisoning, yet many questions were left unanswered. In the days leading up to her death, Todd had been involved in tense personal and business conflicts. Reports claim she had refused pressure from powerful figures connected to organized crime, while also dealing with a volatile former partner who still held financial control over her restaurant. Despite these complications, the investigation was brief and quietly closed. Over the years, rumors have suggested that studio interests may have influenced how quickly the case was dismissed, avoiding scandal that could damage profits. None of this has ever been proven, but the unanswered details refuse to fade. Todd's death remains one of classic Hollywood's most unsettling mysteries, a reminder that sometimes the truth was less important than keeping the illusion intact, the movie magic that physically hurt its cast. The Wizard of Oz looks like pure fantasy, but for the people making it, the experience was anything but magical. Behind the bright colors and cheerful songs was a production that pushed its cast to physical extremes most audiences never imagined. Early Technicolor cameras required intense lighting, and reports claim the heat on set often climbed past unbearable levels. Actors performed under blinding arc lamps while wearing heavy costumes and thick makeup that trapped heat against their skin. Fainting, exhaustion, and burns were constant risks, not rare accidents. The makeup itself was another problem. It wasn't designed for comfort. It was designed to survive the lights. Some formulas were toxic, causing rashes, eye damage, and lasting skin issues. One actor originally cast as the Tin Man was reportedly hospitalized after inhaling aluminum-based powder, forcing the studio to replace him mid-production. Even the replacement makeup was still dangerous. Stunts added another layer of risk. One cast member suffered serious burns during a pyrotechnic mishap, while others signed waivers acknowledging the possibility of injury or temporary blindness. Complaining publicly wasn't an option. Studios controlled the narrative, and the show had to go on. What audiences remember as a timeless classic was created under conditions closer to endurance testing. And while myths would later surround the film, the real danger didn't come from legends. It came from the price actors were expected to pay for movie magic. The film where tragedy followed everyone home. The Misfits was meant to be a powerful drama, but what happened behind the scenes made the film feel unsettling, long after the cameras stopped rolling. Starring Marilyn Monroe, Clark Gable, and Montgomery Clift, it brought together three icons at moments when their lives were quietly unraveling. Filming took place in the Nevada desert under brutal heat. Reports suggest Monroe was already struggling with health issues, and the conditions only intensified her reliance on pills. Clark Gable, determined to prove he still had it, insisted on doing physically demanding scenes himself, enduring long days in extreme temperatures. Just days after production wrapped, he suffered a fatal heart attack. Many believe the strain played a role. Clift arrived on set battling pain, addiction, and the emotional aftermath of a devastating accident years earlier. He was visibly declining. Within a few years, both Monroe and Clift would also be gone. Nothing supernatural was ever proven, but the timing was impossible to ignore. The Misfits became more than a film. It felt like a closing chapter for an era, marked by exhaustion, pressure, and loss, from beloved child star to a forgotten ending. Carl Alfalfa Switzer grew up in front of America. His freckled face and mischievous grin made him one of the most recognizable child stars of the 1930s. But when the cameras stopped rolling, fame didn't follow him into adulthood. As he grew older, Switzer struggled to escape the shadow of his childhood role. Acting work dried up, and reports suggest he bounced between odd jobs just to get by. The attention that once defined his life slowly disappeared, replaced by financial stress and frustration. In 1958, his life ended during a dispute that spiraled out of control. Accounts claim an argument over money escalated into violence, ending with Switzer being shot. Authorities ruled the incident self-defense, though conflicting witness statements later raised doubts about what truly happened. The case faded quickly from the headlines. Despite once being a household name, Switzer's death barely registered in Hollywood. His story became a quiet example of how child fame often came with no safety net. When the spotlight moved on, so did the industry. When a billionaire tried to engineer beauty. Howard Hughes was a genius, a recluse, and one of Hollywood's most powerful figures. But his influence wasn't limited to airplanes and movie budgets. At times, it crossed into fixation. While producing a film meant to launch actress Jane Russell, Hughes reportedly became obsessed with how she appeared on camera. Unsatisfied, he decided to fix it himself. Using aviation principles, he designed a custom undergarment meant to lift and shape her figure in a very specific way. The result was complex, uncomfortable, and wildly impractical. According to Russell, the contraption didn't work at all. She quietly ignored it, adjusting her own clothing instead. The effect Hughes wanted still appeared on screen, and he never realized his invention was never used. This episode was just one glimpse into Hughes's growing need for control. Reports claim he kept detailed files on actresses, tracking their appearance and making casting decisions accordingly. As his behavior grew more erratic, his power never faded. Hughes's story wasn't just about eccentricity. It showed what happened when unchecked authority met obsession, and how little anyone could do about it. Superman's death that still doesn't add up. George Reeves became a household name as Superman, a symbol of strength and certainty. But the way his life ended left behind questions that have never fully settled. In 1959, Reeves was found unresponsive in his home, and authorities quickly ruled the case a personal tragedy. Still, many details surrounding that night felt difficult to reconcile. According to reports, guests had been drinking downstairs when a loud noise was heard from Reeves's bedroom. Instead of immediately rushing to investigate, there was a noticeable delay before police were contacted. When officers arrived, aspects of the scene raised eyebrows, including the absence of clear physical evidence that matched the official conclusion. What added to the confusion was Reeves's mindset at the time. He had recently become engaged and was making plans for the future, with renewed interest in reviving his career beyond his superhero role. Friends later said he seemed optimistic, not withdrawn. Then there were rumors, never proven, involving complicated personal relationships and powerful industry figures. The case was never reopened, and no alternative explanation was officially pursued. Still, decades later, the unanswered questions linger. The man who played an unbreakable hero left behind a mystery that Hollywood was never eager to revisit. The feud that turned petty into legendary. Few rivalries in Hollywood ever became as personal or as theatrical as the one between Joan Crawford and Bette Davis. What began as professional jealousy slowly turned into decades of resentment, sabotage, and perfectly calculated spite. The tension reportedly started over roles and romantic competition, but it exploded years later when both women starred in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. On set, cooperation was optional. Stories circulated of Crawford allegedly adding weight to her costume during a scene where Davis had to drag her across the floor, leaving Davis injured. Davis, never subtle, is said to have retaliated in ways just as deliberate. Their rivalry spilled into public view at the Academy Awards. When Davis was nominated and Crawford wasn't, Crawford reportedly contacted other nominees, offering to accept the award on their behalf if they couldn't attend. When her moment came, she walked past Davis and accepted the Oscar on live television, smiling as cameras flashed. Even after Crawford's death, the feud refused to end. Davis's infamous comments sealed their legacy as Hollywood's most relentless enemies. Beneath the pettiness, though, was something deeper. Two powerful women fighting for relevance in an industry that thrived on turning them against each other. Hollywood's golden age sold a dream. Flawless stars, perfect stories, and a world where everything ended right on cue. But behind the curtain, that dream was carefully manufactured, often at a cost no audience ever saw. These weren't just strange anecdotes or forgotten scandals. They were patterns. Image over truth. Control over care. Silence over accountability. The films endured, the legends lived on, but many of the people behind them paid a heavy price to keep the illusion intact. And maybe that's the most unsettling part. Not that these stories existed, but how long they stayed hidden. Because once you realize how much effort went into creating perfection back then, it makes you wonder how much of Hollywood's magic today is still built the same way.